Good evening, dear guests. We are starting our webinar, which is one of the webinars about GCP we are running. Initially, we started doing these webinars as the supplementary part of our course, which is called the GCP Challenge. It is a big course for advanced GCP professionals who have been certified in GCP several times and want to know something more and get more practical information about the cases of usage of GCP and to get more information which they could apply in their practice. Could you please tell me if you are one of those students, of those trainees of our GCP Challenge course? Tap a yes or, type a yes or a plus or something in the chat. And then what happened later? Do you remember what you were doing on the 6th of January this year? Who remembers what they were doing? I don't remember what exactly I was doing during the day, but in the evening, my colleagues told me that the third revision of ICH GCP E6 had been issued, and now we are facing a new reality. It will be valid in July of this year, and we decided that we had to upgrade the course. And we also had promised to our trainees of the GCP Challenge to upgrade the course according to the requirements of the third revision of ICH GCP E6. And then we decided that we won't upgrade the challenge, but we will create a new course. It is a course that will help you if you have a lot of experience with the second revision of GCP. But you need to know what changes are awaiting you in July and how your work will change compared to your previous experience, to your previous habits and knowledge. That's why we have created a new course. And that is called GCP Transfer. We are transferring from the reality of R2 to the new reality of R3. And we have decided to make it all work together. So basically, the trainees of the GCP Challenge, whom we are very happy to see here, will also get the access to GCP Transfer. And it is one of the gifts I would like to give you today. And I will talk about more gifts later. But right now, we are having a great opportunity to listen to the lecture of Nechama Katan from the USA, who will present herself and tell us about the CRF and what's going to happen to it in the new reality of R3.
Helps if I unmute. Can you guys all hear me? Raise your hands, emojis, something, react. I want to, first of all, thank you for giving me an hour of your time. Judging from the number of languages most of you speak, it's quite late for you in the day. And so I appreciate that time. All right, I'm going to jump into the presentation. Just a couple quick notes. There's about 25 of you on the call, which is a small enough group that we can make this interactive. So you have two choices. You can put comments in the chat, which I will not read, but Alana will read out loud. Or you can unmute yourself and just interrupt me, or you can do a reaction on an emoji, which I may or may not see. Just either put something in the chat or unmute yourself, and let's make it as interactive as possible, because I think it's important to have a conversation, not just to present something. So let me get my screens into screen. There it goes. And I am going to share. One moment. Here I am. Okay, so now I'm going to share. Share. All right. Oh, I can still see the emojis. Great. So can you guys see the screens? Just some thumbs up if you guys can see the screens. Anyone? Yep. Perfect. Okay, cool. So beyond the CRF, reimagining clinical data through ICH E6 R3, as the introduction said, R3 is out. Thank God it's finally here and we can use it. And it's it really changes a number of things. And I am going to let me just give a quick here's who I am. So who am I? I'm a Wicked Problem Wizard. I've just formed an organization called Wicked Problem Wizards. You can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me there. I help organizations implement complex and not so complex technical solutions. For the last almost decade, I have been building a very large RBQM team at a large pharma organization, and I've been speaking in the industry around RBQM, ICH, both E6 and E8, as well as audit trail analytics. But my background from the dark ages is a mathematics degree and statistics degree. And as I say to tell people, the great thing about mathematics degrees is that they qualify you to learn anything, but to do nothing. So you don't know anything coming out of school, but you can learn anything because you've done you've understood the mathematics. Any of you guys mathematicians, statisticians? I don't see any of you guys thumbing up or down. All right. So it's a way of looking at the world. Okay, so the agenda today is we're going to talk about it's not just CRF data anymore. There's been a lot of focus on CRF data. R1, R2 talked about doing data reviews. And really, as we start to look at modern clinical trials, there is less and less and less CRF data available. And as a percentage of the total data for the trial, it's becoming less and less relevant. So that's kind of the first part of it. The second is there's a huge amount of discussion in R3 around proportional risk and RBQM. So we're going to talk about RBQM or RBM was in R2, but it was in R2 in a different way with a different focus. So we're going to talk about that, as well as what does it mean to do proportional risk. And then finally, we're going to close on some topics around audit trail analytics and data governance. So any questions so far? All right. So E6R3 is not just CRF data anymore. Analysis for the last probably 5 or 6 years has started to show that the amount of CRF case report form data in a ongoing clinical trial across pretty much any TA, though it's particularly true in oncology and other TAs where there's a large number of assessments, is that the CRF data is less than 25% of the study data. And what is different that's been true in the past is that more and more studies, and again, particularly in this case, vaccine trials, critical endpoints are being collected in non-CRF ways. Right? So critical endpoint data is no longer, it used to be, well, okay, we had all this extra data, but it was just lab data. Oncology's always had imaging data and tumor assessment data that's critical endpoint, but EPRO, patient reported outcomes, clinician reported outcomes, eCOA, have become critical endpoints for many types of trials. And that causes a problem with traditional data management organizations and the way of doing work. And the problem that it causes is that a traditionally trained data manager, and I'm going to just put a stake in the ground and say from 10 years ago, if you gave them a data set that was patient-reported outcomes and you said, would you please do something with this? Their answer is, there is no reason to review it. Why is there no reason to review it? Because you can't query it. The data won't change, right? And the challenge with that is that the purpose of R2 was never to change data. How much data changes on a clinical trial, anyone? Unmute yourself and answer. Amount of data that actually changes on a clinical trial is about 3%. So data is not changing on clinical trials, CRF data or not, okay? It's that the data is that the process needs to be changed. And so it's not that you only review data that you can query and that the only way to engage with the data is to query it, but it's how do you start to address the process? So R3, the quote from R3 is clinical trials may use data from a variety of sources, including those not generated or collected at the trial site. And so that includes digital health technologies, routine clinical care, wearables, patient-reported outcomes, tons and tons of data that is not collected in the CRF, not attached to a visit, right? So a lot of the analytical tools that exist in the industry talk about visits. And the data is, there's a huge amount of it, okay? So you get a couple chats. So let me just go back through those challenges one more time. I'm seeing there's some chats, but I don't get the previews of them. So if there's any questions you want to raise, let me know. So CRF data is now less than 25% of the data. You need something besides querying the data point. You're not going to change the data point. Therefore, you're not going to query the data point. You need to address the process. And the data is no longer in a nice patient visit format. So a lot of the aggregation of the data by patient visit is no longer relevant. Any questions on kind of this big shift in how clinical trials have been conducted in, let's say, the last 10 years? All right. You can always ask the questions later. So if we think about E2 to it's R2 to R3, not E2 to E3, sorry, it's R2 to R3. In R2, there was central monitoring, and you had the option to do central monitoring to do data review, right? That was that paper that starts to talk about how do you set up key risk indicators, QTLs were in R2. And there was a discussion of central monitoring as an acceptable way to monitor the trial. What has changed with R3 is that it's no longer a way to do a trial, but RBQM, risk-based quality management, has to be systemically inherent in the data quality review of the trial. So it went from something that was optional to something that is required, and not just as a side activity. So people who've worked in RBQM organizations or central monitoring, people think of central monitoring as, maybe it's 50 people in an organization of 1,000, or it's 10 people in an organization of 200. It's a separate group of people. No, R3 is very clear that RBQM as a way of thinking becomes the way to do data cleaning, review your data, and make sure that the data on the clinical trial is what? It's fit for purpose. So what does it mean to be fit for purpose? An edit check or a query is going to answer the question is, can you verify that the data is correct, right? So you have data verification in R2. And historically with eCOA, you had data verification, which is take the source data, take the current data, show that they match, right? That's data verification. Fit for purpose says that the data is collected appropriately with the appropriate process and the appropriate controls in place. So let me give you an example of something where the data is verified, but not fit for purpose. So you guys can get a sense of where I'm going with this. So I open up a trial and I discover that every, this is a fun one, every QRS interval on the EKG, so right, the EKG has four different intervals. One of them is called the QRS interval. And there is a site someplace in the world that had every reading for that interval was identical for every patient visit. It's medically impossible. Okay. It's so medically impossible that, you know, if you go in and get an EKG done and you compute those, you have those intervals read, the chances of them coming up with the same reading off the same EKG from two different raters is small. There's a lot of noise in that measurement. So you raise an issue. The difference between a risk and an issue and a realized risk, but let's talk just, you know, you raise an issue and you say, hey, go back to the site, ask the site, what happened here? How are you taking this measurement? And the response comes back, it was verified. So what does verified mean? What verified means is that the data point that was entered in the medical record or the source, whatever source was, and the data in the CRF matched. So they said, up, verified, close the site issue in CTMS. Okay, but the data makes no sense. If you have a QRS interval that's being repeated across any number of measurements, it doesn't make any sense. There's something wrong. That data was not collected correctly, and that data is not fit for purpose. So it passed SDV, and it probably would have passed SDR, source data review, because you wouldn't necessarily see that value in context of all the other values at the site, right? You would see it in a visit, you see 200 numbers, the next visit you see 200 numbers. You're not, you know, overall, you're not going to notice that one interval is exactly the same, 183 or whatever the number was, it doesn't matter. But in a RBQM assessment, you would say, wait, there's something, this number doesn't make any sense. There's not enough variability in it, and that there is a problem at that site. And that problem at that site could be a number of things. So let's go to proportional response. We've identified here that we have a data point that writing a query on didn't make any difference to, because I said, yep, verified the data, it's correct. Now, what's the proportional response? Okay, so if this was a trial where ECGs are being collected just because there was a secondary or a tertiary endpoint, we always collect heart measurements, maybe we let it go. Okay, that's one proportioned response. The second option is, oh, what else is going on at this site? Do you see other propagated measures that look like the site isn't taking measurements? What do heart rate, blood pressure, those types of numbers? One moment, sorry. You know, are they also being duplicated? Or do they have too little variability? Do we see the right number of adverse events about being reported? Are there any other signs that this site might be confused? Okay, so these are the types of things you want to think about with a proportionate response. If there are sufficient other things that you're seeing at this site, okay, that either the site has other odd behavior, or this particular measurement, this indication, let's say it's it's an indication for which cardiac issues are listed as a critical concern in a safety profile, you're going to respond to it differently than if it's something of, oh, you know what, we just collected it because the clinician on the trial thought it'd be a good idea to collect it, right? Do you see the difference between the two? And you need to respond appropriately and proportionally. So if it's a critical endpoint and there's other data at the site that says there's a problem, maybe it warrants a site visit. Please explain to me that this machine is working correctly, that you know how to take these measurements. Can you explain why you put in exactly the same number every single time? Or could you reproduce it even, right? Wouldn't that be cool? Let them reproduce it, you know, run 3 or 4 of these measurements and come up with the same number twice and see if it's even possible, right? So that's where you're going to respond more if it's critical data and it's critical to the success of the trial, or you see other things in that context that concern you, and you're going to respond less if it's otherwise not important. All right. Let me take another example here where we talk about a proportional response. If I were to send that measure to the clinician, so let me take another example that's maybe a little bit easier to understand. A site has all of the blood pressures at the site range from about 105 to 110 over 82 to 87. So they're perfectly healthy blood pressures, right? So they're in range, blood pressures are in range, but the rest of the study has a blood pressure range that's much wider, okay? And the question is, do you really think that site is taking blood pressure measurements correctly, or are they just making up numbers that fit that range? If I go to clinical and say, clinical, please review these numbers, what are they going to say? They're going to say, that's in range, there is no risk. You have to understand the person who looks at the data point has a filter, and the clinician is worried about a safety profile. A blood pressure of 110 over 75 is not a safety problem. Okay, so the clinician is going to say not a safety problem. The person doing operational data review or data management data review is going to look at that data point or central monitoring and say, it's odd that all of the data looks like it's very close and that there's not enough variability. And we know from R3 that if there's not enough variability, that's going to trigger, you need to look for cases where there's not enough variability. Then what are they going to do in that root cause process systemic monitoring? Look, they're going to look at other data at that site and say, where else do I see other signs of the site is confused about the protocol, or the site isn't following the protocol as we expected, or the site doesn't seem to have sufficient oversight? Is that data being entered much, much later than the rest of the data, right? So if the data for everything else was entered on one day, let's say you have all the visits and the data gets entered within 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, and the blood pressure, someone went back and entered all the blood pressure measurements for all of the patients 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks later, an auditor would look at that behavior and say, why are they entering this data later, right? And the data doesn't have enough variability. Do you see where it starts to become the same data point that is of no interest to a clinician now becomes quite interesting to someone trying to understand process? Is there a question? Jones? No, you're welcome to interrupt and ask a question. Okay. All right. So that's kind of the difference between R2 said was really the world under R2, the way it got implemented was data management focused on edit checks, queries, data review plans that were, the FDA calls them Christmas tree review plans. You had 200 checks, and then you added another 10 checks, and then you took those 210 checks into the next trial, and you added another 30, and you had 250 checks. but there were individual checks that were literally checkboxed, okay? And with a little bit of central monitoring on the side. That was what R2, the world under R2 has looked like. The world under R3 is going to have to be, okay, let me think about the data. Let me ask, what are the risks involved? What is the relative importance of that data point in the context of the rest of the data? Even if I'm not going to change that data, in neither situation with the blood pressure or the KRS interval would that data be changed, because that's what's in source. But I might have to throw out patients because I don't believe the data. The data wasn't fit for purpose. Okay. And I need to focus on root cause. I need to look at the whole process, the whole context under which that data was being collected and reviewed. Any questions? Anything in the chat? Okay.
I cannot see questions so far, but dear guest, you are most welcome to ask them if you have any.
Did you say there are questions so far, or there aren't any yet?
No, not yet.
Okay, perfect. That means I'm either being completely clear or you've checked out. So, all right. So proportionate risk again. Just to reiterate this, because I think it's so important. It's a risk-based approach to quality management. It's incorporating quality into the design of the trial, and you're focusing on critical to quality factors. So I'm going to read this in a couple of different ways, one of which is the response to the Christmas tree protocol. So the FDA, and I think it was 2019 or early 2020 maybe, said, look, knock it off with these Christmas tree protocols, where what's the Christmas tree protocol idea? It's that you have a Christmas tree and you have ornaments on it. So first you have your grandmother's ornaments, then you have your mother's ornaments, and then you got married and you put your ornaments up, and then you had children and they made an ornament in first grade and in primary and second grade, and you just keep adding things up, and every year you just keep bringing and adding more and more and more. Okay, that's a Christmas tree protocol. And what happens when you do that, the protocols get too complicated to actually be run at the site. You end up with concerns because the site is legitimately confused on how to run that protocol. There's too much stuff happening. And then what you need to do is say, okay, I've got an indication. I have primary endpoints, what's really important. I have secondary endpoints, what's really important. And then make sure that the data collection for those primary endpoints makes sense. The data collection for the secondary endpoints makes sense. Quality, critical quality factors say that if I've got a risk, let me take an example of a risk. You have a vaccine trial, and on that vaccine trial, you have a physician, you have an ePro device. The patient can enter symptoms, no symptoms. It's kind of a standard design, right? And so if they enter, yes, they have a symptom, then they need to have a follow-up visit. So there's a couple places for risk. Okay, so first is patients don't enter that data into the ePro. So how do you make sure the patient enters the data into ePro? They have symptoms or not symptoms. Do you put in place reminders, right? We all do great with reminders. Do you put in place a secondary reminder system that says, hey, the patient didn't enter it, maybe we should call them up and talk to them and see if they'll then enter it, right? If that data is really important, you need to start building those systems to make it possible. If you could, let's say theoretically, right? Let's just theoretically say that the symptom that they need to report is temperature, okay? Body temperature. And you send them all home with a Fitbit that happens to measure body temperature. Great. Does the patient have to enter the data? No. Now I've removed the risk of the patient remembering to enter that data. Or let's take heart rate, right? The patient has to enter, I had an irregular heartbeat. My I had tachycardia or something like that, right? Some fast heart rate, low heart rate, right? Give them a heart rate monitor. Don't have them enter into a pro, into on their phone, right? Don't have them enter into their phone like this. Hey, I had whatever. No, just collect the data directly from the device. Now, there's other risks with the device. You have to make sure that the patient is actually wearing that device. But once you've set it up, now you're no longer reliant on a patient that is notorious for forgetting things. Patients forget things. They get tired of entering their information. Patients are generally not compliant over long periods of time. There's lots of reasons to be compliant or not. They might enter the information they think they want you to enter. No, just collect the information directly. Okay. So that's a way of thinking about your data collection in a more risk-based approach. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing that you really need to understand is that you are never fixing the data. Let me say that again. You are never fixing the data. If less than 3% of the clinical trial data ever changes, there's no such thing as dirty clinical trial data. Just take a second and make you think about that. There is no such thing as dirty clinical trial data if only 3% of the data changes. So then what are you doing? Why do we spend, or why do sponsor companies and CROs spend millions of dollars on clinical trials doing data cleaning? We're not actually cleaning the data. Any ideas? You guys are quiet. Okay, you're fixing the process. So what are you looking for? So let me give you some examples. Critical endpoint data is being captured in your ePro device, and the data that needs to be uploaded. So I heard about a trial once where the ePro data was just simply not entered. It wasn't showing up in the database. I didn't make it all the way through from the vendor, all the way through and come across and whatever into the data lake, the data warehouse, the data lake, and it gets flagged. Hey, there's no ePro data at this site. So the first answer is, oh, no, the data is there. It just takes a long time to load. So we tend to deflect risk. Nah, it's just not loaded yet. So that you ignore it. And then you go back and say, no, there's still no data there. And you go back and check it. So what happened in that particular story? It turned out that an entire country wasn't loading data because the way the CRO had set up the devices, they hadn't set it up to load. They lost an entire country's worth of ePro data. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is make sure the data is showing up and that it's not just showing up on the vendor portal, but it's showing up all the way through your data process to where you need to get it. If it's in the vendor portal and it's not in your system, that's actually not so bad because you can move it across. But you need to make sure that the data is coming in and that you understand that the data is coming in a timely manner. It is not okay, and my non-regulatory point of view, I cannot speak for regulatory agencies of any way at all, but it is not cool to say, well, it just takes 3 months for the data to catch up. We'll get it in 3 months. Don't worry about it now. Don't worry about it now. Well, guess what? In 3 months, all of those patients' ePro devices will be finished and done. You generally don't give people ePros for a long period of time. And if you don't have that data and you can't find that data, all of those patients will have been disqualified from the trial if that's critical data. So you need to make sure the data exists. You need to make sure that the data looks like it's being collected appropriately. Everyone in the industry has a story of when some site decided to help the patients enter the data and went through and helped them enter the data, either over a WhatsApp call or without talking to the patient. But regulatory agencies don't like that very much. And then if there's a ton of missing data, you need to go make sure you understand what's the missing data. Are the patients entering, you've asked them to enter 5 pros and they enter 2. What happened to the other 3? Again, if you catch that early, you can go fix it. You can fix the process. You can call up the site and say, oh, where's the other 3 pros? And they'll be like, well, we forgot to hand them out, or we forgot to educate the patients on it, or patients will only enter one probe. They will never enter more than one, right? That's all feedback you need to bring in. So that's an example of fixing the process, not the data. And no point in that entire discussion of ePro did I say go in and change a data point. Right? So we're not going to query the data. We're not going to change the data point. But if you're missing that data, you're going to end up with a quality finding, or you're going to have concerns about the health of your trial. AE underreporting is another favorite one of mine. So what do? You statistically guess at how many expected AEs, okay, adverse events. And there's a million ways to statistically guess at it. You can take an ongoing trial and just say, per patient visit, I have so many AEs at every site, and this site's the bottom 5%. Now, statistically, there will always be a bottom 5%, but usually what happens is you get a whole bunch of sites that just don't present any adverse events, or very, very few. I was on I've heard of a trial at a large sponsor where you had a phase 3 oncology trial, and you had sites in certain geographical regions are known to report fewer adverse events than others. Doesn't mean that we don't need them. They just don't report them. And there were whole sites with no adverse events at all for phase 3 oncology trials, phase 3 oncology patients. So these patients had very advanced cancers. It was in stage 3, not stage 4, right? So stage 3 cancer treatments. Generally, patients with stage 3 cancer have adverse events. You know anyone with cancer, so there should be something going on at that site. So you usually can generate some measure of what are those sites with very few adverse events. So what you cannot do, and you could never do under R2 or R1 or any other regulatory situation, is call up the site and say, you don't have enough adverse events. Would you please go find some? Right? That's not cool. You can't do that. However, what is extremely effective is to call up 10% of your sites, both sites with a lot of adverse events and sites without any adverse events, and ask them to explain to you why and when they report an adverse event. So this is the difference between your mother saying to you, or your spouse, have you emptied the dishwasher? Have you done the dishes? Have you done the dishes? Have you taken out the garbage? Have you done the dishes? Right? After someone says to you the same thing over and over again, you go, yeah, sure, I did it. Go away, leave me alone, right? Versus someone coming to you and saying, explain to me how often do the dishes have to be done? And then you say, well, we probably should do the dishes every day. Why? Well, because we're going to get mice. Okay. Or maybe the dishes have to happen every meal. I don't know. It depends on your house, right? Or the dishes have to be cleaned every time you wash the dishes. But if you go to someone and say, explain to me when you're reporting adverse events, then they're going to come back and give you an understanding of when they report adverse events. And you are going to discover all sorts of interesting things about what the protocol says to them, what the person you've sent to talk to them has told them, and any number of other things in the middle, okay, and cultural differences. And that's going to actually get you, again, that's fixing the process, not the data. Okay, so then the other thing is think about proportionate response. Drop edit checks that never fire. Really, why do you have them? Are you really going to requery non-critical data 15 times? Seriously, right? Someone put a comment in chat. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Have you guys had any of these experiences? Nope. Okay, I'm going to go through a couple more slides, and then let me talk about audit trail for a minute, and then I'll just open the last 10 minutes for questions. So the other really, I think, cool thing about R3 is section 4.2.3, which is my favorite one, which says that you need to review your data and your metadata, and it needs to be a planned activity. Okay, so audit trail an audit trail review is this really nice insight into the process at the site. So you can see a couple things. I brought up one example earlier where you had all the data gets collected on a page, and then 3 months later, they enter in 3 data points, right? So let's say you have all of your vital signs came in except for your heart rate, and then they went in and added heart rate later. Okay, I've never actually audited a site, but I would look at that data and say, wait, why are you entering some data later than the other data? If you had it all together, why didn't you enter it all together? And if you found it 3 months later, where did you find it? Or did you just make it up, right? So that kind of gives you some information. If you have ePro audit trail, one of the quick questions to look at is look at the date timestamps of when those forms were opened and closed. And if you end up with, and I've seen vendors have shown this as examples, where patient 1, then patient 2, then patient 3, then patient 4, then patient 5, then patient 6, every 2 minutes, another patient, and they're in order, or they're always in the same order, that is probably not actually the patient's entering the data. That is more likely to flag as a question of, is someone at the site entering the data or prompting the patient somehow in entering the data, right? So the output data, which is the actual values of the ePro, are really hard to understand. You can look at them and you can look at how much variability is in the answers, and you can look at the CRF data and how much variability is in the answers, and you can come up with some kind of squint at it and get a sense of how under control the site is. Or you can look at the audit trail and say, this site usually enters 500 data points a week, and this week they entered 2,000. And then they went back to 100 every week, right? Well, what happens? What happens? So if you had a certain rate of working, if you, let's say your exercise, you go running and you run, it takes you 10 minutes to run a kilometer, or you walk a kilometer in 10 minutes, right? You're walking slowly. And all of a sudden now you're walking that kilometer in 5 minutes, you're going twice as fast, chances are you're going to be making mistakes. You're going to trip and fall. So if the site has, this is how much work they usually do, and all of a sudden they're doing a lot more, the only way you support that much higher level of work is you either bring in someone who hasn't been working on that trial, you train someone new, you push the people who are doing the work to do extra work. There's a risk, right? That's that bulk entry risk. There's a risk there. And you can see this type of information in an audit trail. So audit trails are data changes. You know, when do data changes happen? When is entry times on ePro? You need to be able to repeat the analysis. So in order to repeat that analysis, you need to have your data flowing into a centralized location where you can do analysis. And then there's kind of 3 levels of analysis I think you need to do this work on. So one is descriptive statistics, and I've got a picture here. So if this is a plot of, let's say, number of data changes per data point over time, my average almost never happens, right? So let's say this is my average. And if all I'm tracking is the average, well, up here, it's going to be a little bit higher, then it's going to come down. I'm going to have a hard time finding this data point because there's all of this historic data. So the average gives you something, but it doesn't really tell you, do I have a problem at that site now? Did I used to have a problem? Have I always had a problem? Then the second thing to think about is control limits. So control limits in this case would be 99% of the data on this study fits between these 2 data points. And I can say, I look like something happened here. Maybe I have a new employee. They trained that employee, everything went back, employee went out, they brought in a backup person, the original employee came back and you cleaned it up, right? You want to see this over time. What's going on over time? And then finally, one chart is easy to read. 100, you need to be able to, if you've got stacks and stacks of these charts, you need some type of advanced analytics that are going to tell me which sites are the most outlying, which sites are having issues now, which sites have always had problems, right? So there's a big difference between this site. If I'm looking at the site at this time point here, this site's fine. I don't care. If I look at the time point here, now I've got a problem. Let me go fix it, right? So you need to understand this time, what's going on over time. And then finally, just as a quick wrap up, right? Key points here. It's not just CRF data. Everyone needs to be doing RBQM and proportional risk and constantly reevaluating your risk. This is not a checkbox activity anymore. And you need to think about your planned audit trails. And in order to do your planned audit trail analytics, you really need to be moving your data to someplace where you can do it. So questions in the last few minutes. You guys have been really quiet.
Thank you very much for the presentation. This is Georgi Kavanko speaking. I'm thinking what would be the aspects for data managers, for example, to look in their planned review of metadata or audit trail, and should such activity be planned, or maybe in some companies, if it is already performed, I would be interested to know by data managers or by the QA.
Yeah, so audit trail review happens by auditors all the time, right? So you go audit a site, you look at the audit trail if you've got a for-cause audit. Data managers are starting to look at it. eClinical Forum published a paper in 21 that's with SCDM that discussed kind of some use cases on how to do it. There's not been a ton of work happening. There's been some work in that space. And then that paper has been revised this year by the eClinical Forum. So keep an eye out for them, or if your company is a member of the eClinical Forum, reach out. I'm leading the working group that's revising that paper. But there's a lot of opportunity to do data review. On audit trail, the challenge is that those files are huge and they cannot be done in Excel. You need analytical support.
Yeah, thank you. I will be looking forward for the publication.
Yeah, okay. Questions, other questions, thoughts? Concerns, disagreements?
Nechama, thanks a lot. This is Oleg, especially for your refresher and maybe actually to some extent an eye-opening statement about the dirty versus clean data. So indeed, it's good to be reminded that more of cleaning of the data points rather the understanding of how these data points appear and what is behind them. Having said that, maybe to reiterate to your point is that in R3, the auditing piece, what used to be the 5.19, the auditing, it is now also emphasizing that we're now going to audit the process rather than the outputs from the process. So it's probably echoing your words, what you just described.
Yeah, once the data is dirty or not correct, let's say those QRS intervals I started as the example, that data is never going to be fixed, right? That data is lost, right? What you can do is sit the site down, that site down and say, okay, if that's broken on your machine, go fix your machine. Right? I can think of a million reasons why someone would just pull a number in, but probably the most obvious one is they didn't know how to collect it, so they came up with a random number that sounded good and put it in. All right, well, go do some training. I hate to say the answer is in site training, but like really understand why that site wasn't collected, what that data wasn't collected, and what to do about it. And then fix it going forward, right? You're fixing the data, you're fixing the process that the data was collected in, which is why it has to happen in real time. It can't happen 6 months later or a year later, because now you just have more data that you can't use.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nechama.
All right. Thank you guys for your time. I hope you found it interesting. Reach out to Garb with more questions. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. But yes, it should be a great class in understanding how R3 impacts the day-to-day life of people in clinical trials. So I'm going, with that, I'm going to stop sharing and let.
Maybe someone else has a question. I can understand that the topic is quite difficult, but maybe there is another question. Feel free to type it in the chat if you cannot unmute yourself, but otherwise you can just unmute yourself and say something. Does anyone else feel like speaking out? Or maybe
And
adding
again,
something?
yeah, and again, I really presented this with the focus from the original class on what happens to clinical trial data, right? There's lots of other things in R3, but this is around the changes with respect to clinical trial data, not everything in R3.
Which brings us to the point that Elena most probably will say something about R3
Yes.
more generically.
Yep, please.
Sure, I will. Thank you very much, Nechama. I have enjoyed the lecture and learned many new things. And I hope that our trainees as well did that. So what I would like to say is that we have a new course. And it is a certification course, so you can get your GCP certificate and get certified in R3. Let me show you something that will give you some understanding of what the course is like. Great. So our course, let me show this one. Our course is designed for 3 levels of trainees because some of you don't need as much information as others, or maybe you know something. Yeah, so we have the 3 levels. The investigator level, which consists only what the investigators and investigator nurses, for example, need to know. Then we have the monitor level, and the biggest level is that of an expert. They have different duration and different number of modules. In our previous courses, we have noticed that most of the trainees were using their laptops, but we also have a mobile version of our learning management system, and you can do it just as you are doing anything on your mobile phone. So our course focuses on the difference between the 2 revisions of GCP E6. So you can see that we are presenting the structure of the new regulation, and then we are also showing you how much has changed in this or that part of GCP, and where exactly you can find this in R2 and R3 and compare, and what else you can read. We have text modules for sure. We have quizzes for you. Do you like quizzes? I hope you do. And besides, of course, we have cartoons. In this course, we decided to use the metaphor of the old doctors and old sponsors and old everyone and the new ones. Of course, we don't mean we are medieval. By no means we are. But we have created this metaphor to make it more vivid, to make it more entertaining, and to get the knowledge stick better. And besides, in the English version, we have automatic subtitles, which is something interesting and new to us. And you can see that, for example, IMP can be delivered to the home address of the participant now. Yeah, and you can notice many other things. We believe that with the cartoons, you can learn better and have better learning experience. And here you can see the link to the course, or to be more exact, to our website, where you can buy the course. now I'm sharing my version of the web screen of the course. You can see that there are many modules. You can read more about them on our website. Yeah, and in the very end of this course, after the quiz, when you have learned and compared the two versions and you have learned what is changing and what is going to be different for you, we have prepared something else that you can use in your daily practice with R3. It is a comparison tool, and Oleg will tell you more about it because Oleg Shevaldyshev is the author of this tool. We are extremely proud of him and of this tool. And I would like him to speak out and tell us something about this tool, how you can use it.
Thank you, Elena. I'm stealing the ball from you. Can you see the Excel file now?
Yeah.
Okay, so as Elena rightfully mentioned, this tool is an attachment to our training, and it consists of different tabs, and the most important tab for you, this is the red one that you can see on the screen right now. And as you can see, this is the Excel sheet, and it's better to use it on the desktop Excel, not the online like Google Excel, Google Sheets. Better to use it on the desktop. So as you can see on the left side, this is the text of R3. In the middle, this is the text of R2. It is by clause. And the R2 clauses are actually nearby the R3 clauses. And as you may imagine, as you generally do know, the structure and the order of the clauses in R3 is completely different from the order of the clauses and sections in R2. And as you can see, certain things are in different places, and we can scroll down and you will see that they are not numbered as we used to be. Like, for example, here you see that this is the the Roman 3 is for the Annex 1, and this is the section 2, and this is the subsection 6, and this is the subsection 1 to 6.1. But the mirror clause in R2 is like the 4.12, and you see the numbering is much easier for us to remember and to follow. But what we did, we actually compared every single clause in R3 to any existing clauses in R2, and then on the right side in the green font we provided our judgment of what has changed. And this is all filterable. It is all searchable. You can, for example, filter out anything that you don't want to see what is the same. You don't want to see what is similar limited. You probably don't want to see what has been removed. You only want to see what has changed. And it's all here now. And you can check it. And also here on the most right in the purple font, there is a blank column that is the only column that is not locked. And you can actually type your own comments. So for example, you have read our comments and our comparison, and you think, this is what I need is also specifically important for myself in my circumstances. So you can do this for yourself. Also, this is also, as I said, it's an Excel tool. It is fully searchable. So let me give you a quick quiz. You generally know the answer. How many times does the word attest can be found in R2 and in R3? And you can simply click here and type attest. And who remembers the R2 by heart, they would actually know that this is only in the witness section related to the ICF signature. But you want to know also how many times the word attest can be found in R3, and it's a little bit more frequently than that, a little bit. So it's now 2 times. So it's not only about the witness, but also about the investigator. And also, as you can imagine, you can sort it differently. So at the moment, in the initial set of this file, it is sorted by the sections of R3. But for example, you want to sort it in in the order of R2 for whatever your reason. You probably know R2 better than R3. Actually, everyone these days knows R2 better than R3. So you want to sort it by R2 sections, and here we go. Now it is sorted in the way that we still live our life currently. It's not yet in the new order, and you can still compare things. Now, the other thing that may be interesting to you is that those who read the R3 carefully, they probably noticed that there are certain discrepancies in the requirements across the document in different sections. So what we did, again, it's an Excel, so you can filter by color. And if you filter by the red color here, it actually will show you the sections that have certain discrepancies, and it will cross compare the one versus the other. So you can simply find, like, for example, there is no longer the requirement for the up-to-date CV to be collected in the section of the investigator as a part of the evidence of their qualification. Still, this is something that is being reviewed by the ethics committee, and this is still something that is a part of the essential records requirements. So this is also here. So do you want this tool? Go buy our course, get the 20% discount, and enjoy. And maybe one good thing for you to know, this is also having the statistics tab. This is more for, to soothe you down, to calm you down, that it's not that bad. It's actually 40% of the R3 text that from our judgment is similar or limited change, and 14 that this is the same. So it's 54% of the document that has not changed or changed to limited extent. So it's not that bad. It's not a complete rewrite of the world. It's a bit better than that. Any questions here?
Oleg, I have one question to our audience. You've said the phrase, those of you who know R2 by heart. Are there people who know R2 by heart in the audience?
Oh my goodness.
Could anyone say that they know R2 by heart?
I think Oleg might. The rest of us probably not.
Oleg might accept the section 6 and section 7, but more or less.
Well, Nechama, I agree with you. I think that it's only Oleg who knows R2 by heart. So please don't scare out our audience.
Come on, maybe someone else knows it by heart. Maybe
Just
someone else still remembers R1 by heart from the 1996.
This is our tool, and this is our course. This tool is something very practical that will help you in your work in clinical trials. But the course gives you the knowledge and the certification. And we will be happy if you learn with us. So if nobody else has any questions, well, if you do have questions, guys, please send them to the chat, or you can also use our email. Yeah, Hannah asks, hello, I would just like to clarify how the existing GCP challenge and the transfer course are linked. Well, we are currently enrolled in the GCP challenge, but not completed yet. Well, you don't actually need to complete one to start the other one, or you don't need to hurry. You can do the challenge course and then start doing this R3 course. There are two different courses on the same thing. The same thing is GCP, yeah, but if the GCP challenge is focused on difficult cases of application of GCP in real life, then this transfer course is focused on the difference between R2 and R3. They do not interfere, and one is not preventing understanding of the other one.
Yes, this is correct. And let me augment to what Elena just said. So indeed, the transfer course is only the transfer. There is very easy switching from Boeing to Airbus, but the challenge course is indeed more. It is designed as a challenge. It is discussing the difficult situations. It has been created before the R3, but it has already been created knowing the R3 draft content. So it was launched back in November 2024, so before the R3 was finally published. But the ideas there in the challenge course, they are to some extent applicable to the R3 reality as well. So if you had been enrolled in the challenge, do not abandon it. It still has its own value. So please go ahead and enjoy it.
Thank you, Hannah. We are happy that we have answered your question. I would like to finish our session with this final slide of our course. I would like to thank you all for being here with us, for learning with the QARP Academy, and for your work in clinical trials. I believe that you are making this world better, and we're happy if we can assist you in that. Thank you very much for your attention.